excuse me. Short video Friday. Yes. So I guess the next subject I want to discuss is a little more vague, I guess. It's easy evil persuasion, how there's this cynical view of humanity, I guess you can see as, okay, you can look at any sort of work of fiction and you can say, yes, um, it's obviously easier to go on the evil side because obviously a lot of the times we associate the evil side with hedonistic side. Most humans I would often describe as hedonistic, if that's any way to tackle the subject. Yes, most people would obviously go to the, you're almost forced to be, in a certain extent, to be a roadblock, an obstruction, be evil, or whatever word you want to describe, an obnoxious um, obstructionist, if anything, any other way to describe it more realistically. How are more easily to be criminals than good guys, unless you find satisfaction in being the good guy and say the heroic story to save the damsel in distress or whatever it may be. But it may be more fun, like um, whatever interpretation you may have of what is more satisfying, to steal the damsel in distress and lock her up as opposed to saving her and being the hero to save the day, because in many cases saving the day against someone that's already um, committed a crime can be more difficult than actually committing the crime itself. Because obviously in many cases it's much easier to commit the crime, especially when you think about all the laws we have now. It's very easy to break the law, and hopefully we can break that cycle. But it's one of those things we realize it's very easy to break the law or whatever it is, but it doesn't mean what is the law is right. I'm just saying it goes along the same side. The people that are say the lawmakers are obviously more evil because they create so many laws that trap you in a circumstance. It shows us how easy it is. And I think the lawmakers in many cases can be the obstructionists and the assholes, and the people that get in the way and are the evil ones. So yes, in many cases we can see in many interpretations of fiction, I guess I want to use as an example because it's easy. It's easy to go to the dark side, the classic Star Wars example, I guess, or any, go to the dark side, the evil side of the Force, or whatever it may be. Any number of works of fiction, you need a lot of evil ones to have the good guy fight, and it just shows that you need a lot of evil ones to be brought over to the dark side to make the one good person have all the battles, to have a lot of battles against a lot of interesting characters, to make sure that nothing gets stale, to make sure that's constantly easy. But it's easier to be persuaded to the dark side, I guess. I guess this is a kind of a non-starter of a subject, but I guess I want to make this video anyway. You need more, I guess in many ways, in works of fiction, it could be something that can be considered a contrivance, because not everyone wants to not kill people. But when it comes to saving people, it's easier in the circumstances. I guess in reality, it's easier to save someone from the circumstance comes far more often because it comes to the circumstances of being at the victim of circumstance, and it's easier to save someone as a victim of circumstance. Saving someone as a victim of a circumstance, saving someone out of that circumstance, than say causing that circumstance. We're always causing the circumstance by our very existence. So I guess it comes full circle because we're all constantly we're all imposing our existence on everyone else because we exist, and once you're in this existence, there's no choice but to impose, at least to a certain extent, on everyone that's existing. But then again, it's not your imposition necessarily, because everyone's imposition is imposed at the same time. There's obviously more overt ones, but since you're like everyone else, you like everyone else is imposing, it makes it almost frivolous to say, or pointless to say that you're imposing when you, like everyone else, is imposing almost equally, because you're existing and your existence is the only thing imposing you, because any imposition you have beyond that is just because you're a victim of your circumstance that makes you act out in a certain way, and it makes you have a different imposition, a different quality imposition on the universe, because you doing nothing. Like the, what is it, the Rush song where it says, you make no decision, or whatever, you still make a decision, or something, right? Or whatever it may be, like I've mentioned before in my other videos, just making vague allusions to silly nonsense. Yes, even making no decision at all has some decision, but then again, it doesn't matter, it still has its vibrations, regardless if it's an action. It doesn't matter if there's an action or not, because regardless, there's a physical side effect, and the physical side effect is always at least speed of light, vibrations moving, having an interaction, having an effect. Your lack of effect has an effect, but it's almost like saying your lack of effect, like all the babies that didn't exist haven't had an effect on our existence right now. All the non-birth births, non-baby to babies had an effect on our existence. Um, but regardless of that, it's once you exist, and you have to realize that the non-babies that didn't exist had to come from somewhere. They come from the energy that already exists. So to a certain extent, yes, but it's in action. It's something that happened differently, and it's not viewing it as happening this way as opposed to this way. It's just saying it happened this way as opposed to some other way it could have happened, and it happened a certain way, and that's the way it happened to happen, and that's the way it was going to happen to begin with. And it's something that we can only do so much about. Like I've said, you can only have so much of an expectation of other people and the circumstances and how much you can expect to endure and exist in. But yeah, the non-existent babies or whatever came from somewhere, and their existence existed some other way. The matter and energy that would have created them did something else. It's just a matter of viewing it as it happened this way as opposed to that way. Not it could have happened this way, it just happened to happen this way, and that doesn't mean it wasn't different necessarily. It just means it happened a certain way, and that effect took its effect in its certain way. So, yeah, I mean, so I guess let's go back to the main subject real quick. Yes, like I was mentioning, being victims of our circumstance. We're all victims of our circumstance to a certain extent, and that's what we're, in many cases, the circumstance of us all being on the imposition obviously makes us being controlled. It's hard to not be controlled. It's hard to know a circumstance. You might be controlled by a specific circumstance to make you do something. A person may extort someone or blackmail someone or whatever it may be, and they're forced to do something evil or wrongdoing, and they're almost forced into it because the circumstance dictated their choices that they had. It's the choice of you have to get a haircut because you have to get a certain job or this, that, or the other thing. It's almost like saying I can't get mad at anyone or get frustrated with anyone because they're just victims of their circumstance, even though the circumstances, I'm going to get angry anyway. But I can realize that and have that change the circumstance. It doesn't mean I couldn't have gotten angry. It just means that the circumstance happened differently. I was on the verge. It didn't happen. And just because it's an illusion of choice, it doesn't mean it's not a choice, but it's a choice that was an illusion. I guess you can view it that way. Um, but things just happen a certain way, and just because they happen a certain way, um, doesn't change the fact that it was something that could have been something else when the choice was being made. Because you never know until you never know until it's already happened. But like I was mentioning before, you never know until it's already happened on the circumstance, and it's easier to be an impositioner, a person that imposes as opposed to that's not causing the imposition. And like the value, there's either more negative or zero. It's either you're imposing or you're imposing less. Um, but obviously we can't make those value judgments like the value judgments that we make when it comes to suffering and harm and any one of those things. When it comes to sentient feeling and sensation, we can never put our fingers on it, but it is easier to be um, on the dark side because we're all automatically on the dark side, trying our best to fight against the reality that we're in, and making sure that we can go for the good side and fight for the better good because we're all positioners. And it's easier to save someone because the existence and circumstance of imposition on everyone than to say put someone else in the circumstance, because obviously we're always fighting an uphill battle, and it's easier to save someone in the uphill battle um, than the constant imposition. Obviously there's worse imposition, um, but we're always constantly doing better, hopefully trying to save someone. We're constantly trying to increment ourselves going upwards as opposed to going downwards, because generally speaking the downwards is already there and we're just constantly fighting up, and it's the default that makes us keep on going down, or we're already down, and the default only changes once we're trying to eliminate the bad. So I guess that's another way of looking at it and make it seem not as quite depressing. We're constantly going for the uphill battle, and it's easier to save someone in the circumstances of existence based on the imposition that we all have, and existence having an imposition on us and us having an imposition on everyone else, than, say, causing more detriment, because the detriment by default is already existing. I guess it's easy to do. It's easy to cause the imposition, but the things that we understand as the circumstances, we know that it's easier to pull someone up from a cliff as opposed to, say, pushing them, if that makes any sense, off the cliff. I don't know if that makes any sense, but yeah, so I guess that's all I need to say. I hope that made sense. But I guess it does show something about human nature, and I went over the time limit. It's fine. This will be the only exception, I guess, because it is a kind of a vague subject. So yeah, it is easier to be manipulated, say, on the evil side, because the evil is the default. But obviously, it's almost easier to be the savior because the saving is all we're trying to do in the end, based on the default negative that we're always being imposed on. Because there's almost so much imposition by default. It's about hopefully making it better and cleaning up the mess, and that's what we're doing. Hopefully, not spilling more of a mess. I don't know if that makes any sense. I guess I'm just trying to come from a different point of view and see if I can go anywhere from that. So yes, easy evil persuasion. Um, you can say it's cynical view. It's a cynical view of humanity or anything. Obviously, nature shows that it has to do what it has to do to survive. In many cases, it does things that are very harmful. But then again, it's either you starve to death or you choose to kill the thing horribly and slowly and eat it alive because you have no other means. I guess that's a better reason to say put animals in zoos so that they don't have to horribly kill something and you can feed them something else and they don't have to have more and more children to feed the cycle to make sure that they can have more meat in their diet and you can find some other means to feed them other than have the cycles of nature. The cycles of nature can continue perpetually for no good reason. Find some way to end that cycle and then prevent births to make sure these births keep happening and so on and so forth, to feed the endless cycle of nonsense and bullshit. So yeah, it is easier to manipulate because by default, I guess in many cases, it comes down to selfishness, and it's easy to be selfish because you know your circumstance, and that usually comes down to the wrong side, the imposition side, to cause more pain. The imposition or the less imposition, or you're either an imposition or a less impositioner. And when it comes to selfishness, it's easier to be an impositioner because you know your circumstance, you're living in your body and your vessel, so it makes it easier to be selfish. And I guess selfish in many circumstances has an association with imposition and evil because you're imposing on others to get your simple satisfaction. And your simple satisfaction is a projection more than anything, other than, say, satisfying hunger. But then again, it's not the same as imposing a spike through a guy's eye just to get your next meal. Your next meal doesn't mean as much as, say, the spike in the guy's eye. I think it's a value judgment you can do your best to make, at least reasonably, in recognizing exactly the weight of both sides of what getting, an overt harm as opposed to not getting your next meal, more of a less overt deprivation. Yeah, I guess it's easier to be persuaded to the evil side, if anything, you want to draw a comparison, than the right side, because more people seem to be motivated by their selfish mechanism than anything else, and what they want or what they're forced into based on their circumstances. So I don't want to go on any longer. That's long enough. So if I have anything else to say, I can mention in another video. So I violated my rule, but it's fine. I guess I can compensate for another video, make another video like 4 minutes. So yeah, I guess that's all I need to say. So bye. I guess that's all I need to say. So like I mentioned before, if I have anything else to say, I'll mention in another video. So thank you, and until next time. Bye.